My dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you, Brother Rashid, for giving us some words of nasiha and advice. Today's Jummah, I want to just talk a little bit about how we can connect to the Qur'an, some of the conversations with the Holy Qur'an for us to take home and apply in our lives. And the Qur'an very often is described by scholars as an ocean which is full of gems, of treasures, and it's multi-layered, has so much meaning that the more you delve into the Qur'an, the more you realize how it's unlimited in its dimensions, in its meanings, and every time you read the Qur'an, it will give you another meaning, another angle. Such is the depth of the Holy Qur'an. Today I want to talk a little bit about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the prophets, the Anbiya, in the Holy Qur'an, and how when we read the Qur'an we should understand these stories of the prophets. The Qur'an is the most read book in the Holy World. And maybe it's one of the most misunderstood books as well, especially by those people who don't know Arabic, for example, or who understand the Qur'an from a very surface layer. And I gave the metaphor, the example of an ocean. If you were to look at the sea from a distance, you see the sea, but it's different for those who actually delve into the sea, who go into the sea, and can explore what the ocean has of its treasures, of its ecosystem, of its depth. But equally so, it's misunderstood by many Muslims at the same time. Although we read the Qur'an, we don't understand the Qur'an. And often that's because of our lack of understanding of Arabic. And sometimes the fact that we oversee the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is actually talking to us. The only mode of communication you have in your lives, in our lives, is the Qur'an. It's the only way you can actually communicate, connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Qur'an is a book of conversation between the divine and the created. Within that, there are modes of communicating, i.e. there are stories of the prophets. But when we read into the stories of the prophets, it's actually a conversation between Allah and the prophets, but also towards me and you, towards creation. Some who have studied the Qur'an, for example, they've read the Qur'an, they've said that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the prophets, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about Nuh alayhi salam, about Ibrahim alayhi salam, about Musa, the story of Ad and the people of Thamud, for example, all the stories of the prophets, some scholars, especially Western scholars, they say the Qur'an is a book which talks about stories of the prophets, but in ways of punishment, to show people, to show me and you, that if you don't follow the law of Allah, the command of Allah, you will be destroyed. Allah will destroy you. The way that, for example, the floods came to the people of Nuh alayhi salam, and the people of Ad and Thamud, they were destroyed via earthquakes, via hurricanes, via a blast, by wind. And the Qur'an is dotted with stories. So this the scholars call targheeb and tarheeb. So targheeb means if you do something, you will remain, you will be rewarded, you will be blessed. And tarheeb is a type of warning to you. If you don't do this, just as other people were destroyed, you will also be destroyed. So the Qur'an very often is seen by some scholars as like almost like stories for us to have warnings. Now, if you read it like this, then the Qur'an is very much like the Bible. But those scholars who really delved into the Qur'an, and actually there's another third line, there's some scholars who see the Qur'an as just a hodgepodge, a mixture of different stories collected together. It has no meaning for them. And it's been copied from the Bible, or Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, God forbid, took sources from the Christians, from the Jews, put together a book, and and he had his own personal ambitions and so on. But the third view is the one of, I would say, and I'm sure you would agree, the scholarly approach that looks at the Qur'an, looks at its meaning, looks at its structure, looks at the spirit. And what they say is that these stories of the prophets, which are mentioned in the Qur'an, are much more beyond targheeb and tarheeb of punishment and encouragement to us. They're actually telling us a bigger picture. It's like a jigsaw. The more you read it, the more the pictures of the jigsaw come together. For example, we have at the moment one of the biggest Qur'an translations that you can buy from Amazon. Abdul Halim, his name is, he's a lecturer from London University. He wrote a book called Exploring the Qur'an, and he talks about this concept of why does Allah talk about the prophets and what is he saying to us. And what he says is that if you look at there's two main things. If you look at the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was given a certain command, a certain task, a certain mission in his life. And those objectors that didn't believe in him called him certain names. They called him a sorcerer, a magician, they rebuked him. They even called him mad, called him majnoon. And they said he has brought about his own religion. So one of the objectives of these stories was to give protection to the Prophet, to tell these Arabs, these pagan Arabs in Mecca at the time, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam hasn't come in isolation as an individual. And then the stories of Nuh alayhi salam were given, and some of the wordings that were used in the Qur'an were linked to the life of the Prophet at the time. So there was a dialogue going on at that time between the Makkans, Rasulullah, and the answers given by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam were done so by God. So Allah would say in the stories how Nuh alayhi salam would also tell his people to believe in the one God. Just like Rasulullah would tell them to believe in one God. To give up your idols, to give up injustice. And the same people would say to Nuh alayhi salam and to Moses, for example, you are mad, you are a sorcerer, you are a magician. And then straight after these stories we have verses such as مَا أَنْتَ بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ بِمَجْنُونَ. With the grace of Allah, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, you are not mad. أَمْ يَقُولُونَ شَاعِرٌ نَتَرَبَّصُ بِهِ رَيْبَ الْمَنُونَ. They call you a sorcerer, a magician, but you are far from it. So Allah is defending Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam on one hand. The other objective behind these stories is not only defending Rasulullah, to show that he's a link, a part of a chain of many of the prophets going back to Adam alayhi salam, which scholars refer to the covenant. The covenant is when creation came about, creation made a covenant, a promise to Allah, that we will always worship you. And this covenant is a link that goes back to time immemorial, to time that we can, going back to the Torah, to the Injil, to the Psalms, and many books that we are not aware of. So this is linking Rasulullah to history, to give him credibility, to give him authority. Because at that time the Jews and the Christians saw themselves as favored status, that the Arabs should not have a prophet amongst themselves. The Jews and the Christians were the ones that were favored with prophets. So the stories seek to show Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam coming from the divine source. But my main point today is to go beyond even this and to show you how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He talks about the stories of the prophets, He's actually communicating to me and you. He's talking and revealing something of His own nature towards His creation. How does He do so? Whenever you read the Qur'an, for example, one of the most beautiful stories of the prophets is Surah Taha. juz number 16. When you read the opening, you have an authorial voice. You have the divine voice speaking, as you do in the Musabbahat surah. For example, سَبَّحَ لِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. So many surahs, so many openings of the Qur'an say, praise be to He who is the Lord of the worlds and the heavens. And this is a repeated theme. Someone who is divine, who is powerful, who is omnipotent, who says, إِنَّمَا أَمْرُهُ إِذَا أَرَادَ شَيْئًا أَن يَقُولَ لَهُ كُن فَيَكُونُ. If He wills for something to happen, there is no logic involved. He doesn't need to justify. He just says, be, and it becomes. This is the divine voice. This is the master, the Maliki Yawmiddin. And this is the opening of the surah. And this same master, my dear brothers and sisters, who repeatedly tells us that He created us from mingled sperm, from water, from nothing. And how He created the solar system and the heavens and the miracles that we see around us. When He talks to the prophets, He talks in a very loving manner. In a way so as to tell us that the barrier that we may think, that you may find when you read, for example, in other books, the Torah and the Injil, this barrier between you and God, actually doesn't exist if you open your heart and you love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah reveals something of this nature when He talks to His prophets in the Qur'an. And one beautiful example I want to give you is of Yunus alayhi salam in Surah Safat. Yunus, he, like Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and all the previous prophets, gave the message to his people, the people of Nineveh. And he was shipwrecked, and he fled from his people, and he was very much disoriented and disappointed by his people who rejected his message, and so much so wanted that they should be punished. And Allah talks about how he was shipwrecked, and how Allah فَأَخَذْنَاهُ بِالْعَرَاءِ وَهُوَ سَقِيمٌ, that Allah took him from the shipwreck and from the belly of the whale and cast him onto the ocean. بِالْعَرَاءِ وَهُوَ سَقِيمٌ. And the imagery here is of almost of a child who has no clothes, who's malnourished, who's being cast onto the shore, and he's malnourished so much so that he's on the verge of death. And then Allah says, and He's talking in the third person, and then He says, وَأَنْبَتْنَا, and then we, what did we do? وَأَنْبَتْنَا عَلَيْهِ شَجَرًا مِنْ يَقْطِينٍ, and we caused plants to grow around him to nourish his body and to give him life again. And this is how his life was restored. And this, my dear brothers and sisters, is an analogy. It's an example how Allah showed His grace to those that He loved. He nourished them. He loved them. And Moses, one of the greatest prophets, the wording, if you read, of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah would say to him, and he would say to God, I have those flaws of human nature which me and you can relate to. He had a list, for example. He came from a family which may have been a social class lower than what would be expected as acceptable in society. Just as the same accusations were made to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Allah, the majestic, the owner, would say in the Qur'an, لا تخافا, do not be fearful. إنني معكما, I am with you both, you and your brother. أسمع, I listen to you. وأرى, and I see everything. Just go. And Musa alayhi salam would say to him, وَيَضِيقُ صَدْرِي وَلَا يَنْطَلِقُ لِسَانِي, I have a lisp, I can hardly talk. People will laugh at me. And Allah would say to him, just go, I am behind you, I am there to support you. And it's so much so as Allah is encouraging His creation to go forward and to do good. And when we read the stories of the prophets, and you read the wording, the Arabic usage, you see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is closer than your own jugular vein. So on this note, the message is to read the Qur'an as a communication between yourself and Allah. When you pray your salah, for example, read those passages of the Qur'an which you understand, and where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking to you, not just in history, but He's talking to you and He's trying, and so that your soul is actually stirred. وَمَا عَلَيْنَا إِلَّا الْبَلَاغُ الْمُبِينُ.